The summer of 1974 was supposed to be just another stepping stone to adulthood. A summer camp filled with long hikes, campfire songs, and lessons in wilderness survival. For me, Sam, it was a way to escape the monotony of small town life. The camp, tucked away in a remote forest, felt like a hidden world, isolated from the weight of societal expectations. I was 18, on the cusp of something unknown, but I didn't yet understand what that was. The first day was a blur of introductions, laughter, and the smell of pine needles baking in the sun. As I struggled with my tent pole, sweat dripping down my face, a shadow loomed over me. "Looks like you could use some help," a voice said. I looked up to find Connor, his grin wide, his blue eyes sparkling with mischief. He wasn't like the others. There was a confidence in the way he carried himself, a natural ease that set him apart. "Sure, if you don't mind," I replied, my voice a little uncertain. Connor knelt down, his movements fluid and practiced. "Been doing this for years," he said, nodding toward the tent. "Stick with me, and you'll survive out here." His playful tone put me at ease, and before I knew it, the tent was standing perfectly. Over the next few days, Connor and I were paired together for nearly every activity. Whether it was navigating forest trails or building fires, we worked as a team, falling into a rhythm that felt effortless. His laugh was contagious, and he had a way of making even the most mundane tasks feel exciting. But there was more to him than his charm. When the group conversations died down, he'd share bits of himself, his voice softer, more thoughtful. He'd talk about dreams of leaving his small town and seeing the world, his words carrying an undercurrent of longing. It was during one of those quiet moments that I realized something had shifted. It wasn't just admiration or friendship, it was something deeper. When Connor smiled at me, my chest tightened. When he brushed against me during a hike, I felt a jolt of electricity. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once. One night, as we sat by the fire, Connor glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "You ever feel like you don't belong anywhere?" he asked, his voice low. The question caught me off guard, but I nodded. "Yeah," I murmured. "All the time." For the first time, I saw a vulnerability in him that mirrored my own. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. The campfire crackled, its embers glowing against the dark canvas of the night sky. Most of the boys had gone to bed, their laughter fading into the distance, but Connor and I stayed behind. The air was thick with unspoken words, the kind that hovered just out of reach, waiting to be said. I could feel his gaze on me, but I was too nervous to meet it. "You're quiet tonight," Connor said, his tone gentle. I shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. "Just thinking," I replied. He leaned back, stretching his long legs toward the warmth of the fire. "About what?" he asked, his voice curious but not pushy. I hesitated, unsure how to put my thoughts into words. "About what comes next, after this." Connor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get that," he said. "Feels like we're supposed to have it all figured out, doesn't it?" His words hit a nerve, and I glanced at him, surprised by how well he seemed to understand me. For a moment, we just sat there, the silence between us comfortable but charged with something unspoken. Finally, he broke the silence. "You're different, Sam," he said, his voice steady but quieter than before. "Not like the others." My stomach flipped at his words, my mind racing with possibilities. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He turned to face me fully, his eyes searching mine. "I mean, I like that about you." The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy but not unwelcome. My heart pounded in my chest, and I struggled to find a response. Before I could say anything, he leaned closer, his movements slow and deliberate. My breath hitched as our faces grew closer, the firelight dancing in his eyes. And then it happened. His lips brushed against mine, soft and hesitant, but full of intent. The kiss was brief, but it ignited something in me I couldn't ignore. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine for a reaction. I couldn't find the words, so instead, I leaned in, closing the distance between us once more. The kiss changed everything. It was like a spark igniting a flame, something neither of us could ignore. We sat there by the fire for what felt like hours, neither of us speaking much, yet saying so much through our silence. Connor's hand found mine, his fingers brushing against my skin before intertwining with mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, like a declaration in the quiet of the night. "I don't know what this means," I finally said, my voice steady but soft. Connor looked at me, his expression calm yet intense. "Neither do I," he admitted, "but I know it feels right. Does it feel that way for you?" I nodded, unable to stop the smile that crept onto my face. "Yeah, it does." The camp had gone silent, save for the occasional chirp of crickets and the distant rustle of trees in the breeze. The world outside that moment felt distant, almost irrelevant. I leaned my head on Connor's shoulder, and he let out a soft laugh, his voice low and warm. "You're braver than you think, Sam," he said. "You always have been." That night, we didn't sleep. Instead, we talked in whispers, sharing secrets and dreams we'd never spoken aloud before. Connor told me about his father's strict expectations and how he'd always felt like he was living someone else's life. I told him about the fear of not fitting in, of always feeling like I was on the outside looking in. Our words wove a bond stronger than I'd ever felt with anyone else. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, we finally fell asleep side by side near the dying embers of the fire. For the first time, I felt like I belonged, like I'd found a part of myself I didn't even know was missing. But that peace was short-lived. By mid-morning, whispers started circulating through the camp. Someone must have seen us by the fire, their narrow-minded curiosity sparking rumors that spread faster than the morning sun climbed the sky. At first, the looks were subtle. Sideways glances, lingering stares that seemed to weigh heavier than they should. By lunch, the whispers grew louder, cutting through the noise of the dining hall like a blade. "Did you hear about Sam and Connor?" One boy muttered to another, loud enough for me to hear as I walked by. My stomach churned, and I kept my head down, praying they didn't notice the heat rising in my cheeks. Connor, however, wasn't one to back down. He stood tall, his jaw tight, his expression daring anyone to challenge him. "Let them talk," he said later as we walked back to our tent. "They don't know anything." His confidence gave me strength, but the knot in my chest refused to loosen. That afternoon, during a group activity, things escalated. A boy named Mark, one of the camp leaders, approached us, his face twisted in disgust. "You two better watch yourselves," he sneered, his voice low but threatening. "This isn't the place for whatever it is you're doing." My hands balled into fists, but Connor stepped in before I could say anything. "Back off, Mark," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We're not doing anything wrong." Mark scoffed, his gaze darting around to make sure others were watching. "Everyone here knows what you are," he spat. "You don't belong here." The words stung more than I wanted to admit, but Connor stood his ground, his presence unshakable. "Maybe we don't belong here," he said, his voice steady, "but we're not going anywhere." That night, as we sat in our tent, the weight of the day pressed down on us. "Do you think this will ever stop?" I asked, my voice barely above a murmur. Connor sighed, his hand finding mine in the dark. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I'm not giving this up. Not for them, not for anyone." The days that followed were a blur of tension and stolen moments. The camp felt less like a place of camaraderie and more like a battlefield, every glance and whisper another weapon aimed at us. But in the quiet of the woods, away from the judging eyes, Connor and I found solace in each other. One evening we snuck away to the lake, the moonlight reflecting off the water like shards of silver. We sat on the dock, our feet dangling in the cool water, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. "I wish we could stay here forever," I said, my voice barely louder than the gentle lapping of the water against the dock. Connor turned to me, his expression soft but resolute. "We can't stay here, Sam," he said. "Not like this, but we can find somewhere better. Somewhere we don't have to hide." His words filled me with both hope and fear. "Do you think that place exists?" I asked, my voice tinged with doubt. "It has to," he said simply, his hand brushing against mine. "And if it doesn't, we'll make it ourselves." The idea of leaving felt impossible, yet thrilling. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life beyond the camp, beyond the judgment and the fear. A life where I could be with Connor without apology. That night, as we kissed under the stars, I knew I was ready to take that leap, no matter the cost. It didn't take long for things to reach a boiling point. The camp, once a place of camaraderie and exploration, turned into a minefield. Every glance felt like a challenge, every whispered word a dagger aimed at us. Connor tried to brush it off, his confidence unshaken, but even he couldn't ignore the growing hostility. I felt like every step we took was being watched, every action scrutinized. It happened late one evening, just before lights out. A group of boys had cornered us near the edge of the woods, their faces lit with anger and twisted with disgust. Mark stood at the front, his posture rigid, his voice dripping with venom. "We don't need people like you here," he spat, stepping closer. "You're disgusting." Connor stood his ground, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "We're not going anywhere," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. I admired his courage, but fear coiled in my stomach like a snake ready to strike. "Just leave us alone," I said, my voice louder than I intended, surprising even myself. But Mark wasn't going to back down. "You think you can just act like this and get away with it?" he snapped. "This isn't how things are supposed to be." With a nod to the boys behind him, the first punch landed. Chaos erupted. Fists and insults flew, the sound of the scuffle echoing through the trees. I tried to fight back, but the odds were stacked against us. Connor shielded me as best he could, taking most of the blows himself. When it was over, we were left bruised, bloodied, and broken, but not defeated. As we stumbled back to our tent, Connor turned to me, his face battered but his eyes burning with determination. "We're leaving," he said firmly. "Tomorrow. No more of this." I nodded, too shaken to argue, but in my heart, I knew he was right. We couldn't stay. Not anymore. The morning we left the camp felt heavy with both fear and hope. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth, but it did little to calm my racing heart. Connor packed his bag quickly, his movements deliberate and precise. I tried to do the same, but my hands trembled as I stuffed clothes and a few belongings into my worn duffel bag. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. Connor looked at me, his blue eyes steady and determined. "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. His conviction steadied me. We slipped out before the camp woke, the sun barely cresting over the trees. The woods felt eerily quiet, as if holding its breath, watching us go. My heart pounded with every step, half expecting someone to call out to stop us, but no one came. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant call of birds waking to the new day. By the time we reached the highway, my legs ached, but the weight in my chest was lighter. We were free, or at least we were beginning to be. Connor held out his thumb as the first car approached, his posture confident despite the uncertainty of our situation. The car didn't stop, nor did the next one, but Connor didn't waver. "Someone will stop," he said, his voice firm. "They have to." It was nearly an hour before a beat-up pickup truck pulled to the side of the road. The driver, a grizzled man with kind eyes, leaned out the window. "Where are you boys headed?" he asked, his tone curious but not judgmental. Connor glanced at me before answering. "As far as you're willing to take us," he said. The man nodded. "Hop in." The ride was quiet for the most part. I sat in the passenger seat, my bag clutched tightly in my lap while Connor leaned against the window in the back. The driver didn't ask many questions, and for that, I was grateful. When he dropped us off at a truck stop on the edge of a small city, he wished us luck, his gaze lingering on us as if he knew more than he let on. That night, we found a cheap motel, the neon sign buzzing faintly as we approached. The clerk barely looked at us as we paid for the room with the crumpled bills Connor had tucked in his pocket. The room was small and smelled faintly of mildew, but it felt like a palace compared to the tension we'd left behind. As we sat on the bed, the weight of the day finally hit me. "We did it," I whispered, more to myself than to Connor. He turned to me, a faint smile on his lips. "Yeah, we did." He reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. "And this is just the beginning." Starting over in a new city wasn't easy, but we learned quickly. Connor found work at a construction site, his strength and determination making him a natural fit. I picked up shifts at a diner, the long hours and low pay a small price to pay for the freedom we'd gained. The city was a far cry from the quiet woods we'd left behind, its noise and chaos both overwhelming and exhilarating. Our apartment was modest, a single room with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors, but it was ours. We spent our evenings there sitting on the floor with bowls of instant noodles and talking about our dreams for the future. Connor often talked about saving enough money to open his own business, while I dreamed of going to college someday. Those conversations kept us going, reminding us of why we'd left everything behind. The first few months were the hardest. Money was tight, and there were days when it felt like the world was stacked against us. The fear of being discovered lingered, especially when Connor came home one evening with a black eye, the result of a coworker who'd overheard something he didn't like. "It's nothing," Connor said when I asked about it, his voice dismissive. But I knew it wasn't nothing. Despite the challenges, we found moments of joy. On our days off, we'd explore the city, finding little parks and hidden cafes where we could just be ourselves without fear. We laughed more than I thought possible, finding comfort in each other even when the world seemed determined to push us down. One evening, as we sat on the rooftop of our building, Connor turned to me, his expression serious. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his voice barely above a murmur. The question caught me off guard. "Regret what?" I asked. "Leaving," he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Everything we left behind." I thought about it for a moment, the memories of the camp and the people we'd known flashing through my mind. "No," I said finally, "because everything we left behind led us here. And here is where I want to be." Connor smiled, his hand finding mine. "Me too." 40 years have passed since that summer, yet the memories remain as vivid as if they happened yesterday. I sit in the living room of the house Connor and I built together, the sunlight streaming through the windows and casting a warm glow on the walls. The faint hum of the radio drifts in from the kitchen where Connor is making breakfast, humming a tune that has become familiar over the years. Our life together hasn't been easy. The world we faced back then wasn't kind to people like us. We lost jobs, friends, and even family members who couldn't accept who we were. But through it all, Connor was my anchor. His love a constant in a world that seemed determined to pull us apart. Looking back, I'm amazed by how far we've come. The small apartment where we started feels like a lifetime ago, replaced now by a home filled with memories. Every photograph on the wall tells a story of trips we took, milestones we celebrated, and the quiet moments that meant just as much. Connor and I built this life together, brick by brick, through sheer determination and an unyielding belief in the strength of our love. This morning, as I watch Connor set a plate of pancakes on the table, I can't help but smile. "What's that look for?" he asks, his voice teasing but warm. "Just thinking," I reply, my voice soft, "about how lucky I am." He laughs, shaking his head. "You say that like I didn't get lucky too." We sit together, the sound of birds chirping outside the only background noise. 40 years, Connor says, his tone filled with quiet awe. "Can you believe it?" I nod, my chest tightening with emotion. "I can, because I felt every one of them, and I'd do it all over again." As we finish breakfast, Connor reaches across the table, his hand covering mine. "You know," he says, his voice low but steady, "it all started with a summer in the woods." I laugh, the sound soft but full of meaning. "And look where it brought us. The world has changed so much since 1974. The battles we fought feel like a distant memory, replaced by a life filled with love and acceptance. But the lessons we learned, the strength we found in each other, they remain at the core of who we are." As I sit here, holding the hand of the man who has been my partner, my love, and my best friend for 4 decades, I know one thing for certain. Our love is the greatest adventure I've ever known. And for that, I will always be grateful. Hey, did you enjoy this story? This is a true story sent by one of our followers here on the channel. We took their incredible journey and turned it into this video to share with all of you. Now we want to know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Your feedback means the world to us. This story is a powerful reminder of how love can overcome even the toughest challenges. Back in the 1970s, living a relationship like Sam and Connor's was an act of unimaginable bravery. They faced prejudice, hate, and even physical violence, yet they chose to stand firm for what they believed in, their right to love and be loved. Sam and Connor teach us that true love is resilient. No matter how many obstacles the world placed in their path, they rose above them together, building a life founded on respect, trust, and mutual support. Now, with 40 years of marriage, they are living proof that love, when nurtured with courage and dedication, can withstand the test of time and adversity. This reflection isn't just about their past. It inspires us to create a more inclusive and welcoming future where no one has to hide or run to live as they truly are. May their story encourage us to celebrate and respect love in all its forms and remind us that everyone deserves a chance at happiness. So have you left your rating yet? On a scale of 1 to 10, what did you think of this story? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to follow the channel to see more amazing stories like this one. If you have a story to share, drop it in the comments below. Who knows? It might just become our next video. We can't wait to bring it to life. See you next time.